And it is my pleasure this morning to introduce our speaker, Dawn Wacek. Dawn serves as the Deputy Library Director of the Crosse Public Library. She's worked in libraries for over 2 decades, focusing on youth and families, and in leadership roles where her passion is the reduction of barriers and finding ways to better serve the whole community. Welcome, Dawn.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here with you all today, and I recognize some of you from the library. So I'm happy to be here talking about libraries, and in particular, the ways that libraries create spaces that serve all of our people. Oh, it's not loud enough? It is on. It's green. How about now? Is that better? Yes? Okay. So the ways we create spaces to serve all of our community. The way we work to create a sense of warmth and welcome and belonging, and how we prioritize access, information literacy, and the freedom to read. So as Deborah said, Dawn Wacek, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I've been with the La Crosse Public Library for around 9 years now. Before I worked here in La Crosse, I was the library director of the Rice Lake Public Library. That's a town of around 8,500, about an hour north of Eau Claire. And before that, I was the Children's Services Manager in Charleston, South Carolina, at a branch on one of several small islands. And when I first started, I worked for a little bit in Columbia, South Carolina, which is a mid-sized city of around 130,000. I've spent several years engaged in continuing education for librarians, talking about everything from adding graphic novels to our collections to how to be more inclusive when we develop our policies and procedures. So all that is to say that I've worked in communities large and small, and I've connected with, taught, and learned from librarians from all over the nation over the last couple of decades. And I think it's funny, when I first heard from Deborah when she reached out to me about speaking with all of you, she included in her email the values of UU. And I was immediately struck by how similar they are to the core values of librarianship. The American Library Association adopted a value statement back in 1999, so I'm going to share some of that with you. It says, "We defend the constitutional rights of all individuals, including children and teenagers, to use the library's resources and services. We value our nation's diversity, and we strive to reflect that diversity by providing a full spectrum of resources and services to the communities we serve. We affirm the responsibility and the right of all parents and guardians to guide their own children's use of the library and its resources and services. We connect people and ideas by helping each person select from and effectively use the library's resources. We protect each individual's privacy and confidentiality in the use of library resources and services. We protect the rights of individuals to express their opinions about our resources and services. We celebrate and preserve our democratic society by making available the widest possible range of viewpoints, opinions, and ideas so that all individuals have the opportunity to become lifelong learners, informed, literate, educated, and culturally enriched." So I want us to think a little bit about some of the similarities in our values and in our practices. The idea that every person we see in our spaces has an inherent worth and dignity, that they deserve the same access to information, education, services, and the programs we provide, regardless of who they are, what they do, or where they live. Our space is their space and is shared among all sorts of people. As shared in the reading, there aren't many truly public places left in America. Most of our shared spaces require money or a certain social status to access. But the public library requires nothing of its visitors. No purchases, no membership, no dress code. We don't require money or even a library card to come inside and access books, e-resources, Wi-Fi, computer or job help, story times, and more. And you can see that locally if you visit our library and walk through the downtown library. You might see one of our city council people browsing for books near one of our unhoused neighbors. You might see our social worker setting up access for a family who needs services in the community. We might see children making art alongside a senior who is learning to knit in our creation space. Every one of our patrons are welcome, every single one is worthy of our service, and libraries remain one of the few spaces this is embodied. We know that in our libraries we've seen the social safety net that used to exist for people has been whittled away over the years. Access to mental health resources, to food, housing, safety, even healthcare in general, all of that has been diminished. And when you think of libraries, you might not think of it as a center for health and well-being, but in many cases, it's exactly that. Through community programs, direct assistance from librarians, fitness classes, and even just basic internet access, libraries are providing important opportunities to those who are seeking health information and services. According to a recent study by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, 59% of libraries help patrons find health insurance resources. Almost 20% bring in healthcare providers to offer free limited services for screenings. And 25% provide free fitness classes, including your local library. Collaboratively with other government agencies, healthcare providers, and medical professionals, libraries keep communities healthier and increase their vitality in ways that make serious impacts, often for patrons with the highest needs. And occasionally, we will hear from people that social mix of patrons, those with high needs and those who just wanted to pick up the latest bestseller, can be uncomfortable. And we understand that. The unpredictable and the unknown can be a little bit scary. A person talking to themselves, or a person carrying all their worldly belongings with them, or a person who's simply expressing their fear or worry or anger can make some of us feel unsafe. It's a pressure point for a lot of libraries. Patrons might ask for more security at branches or express dismay at the population inside the library. Our job often involves us trying to educate one group about the rights of the other. The bottom line, though, for all of us is that as long as folks are adhering to our expectations for basic, appropriate behavior, every single one of them has the right to use the library. And so embracing that discomfort is part of being part of a true member of a community. There are very few places where we get to leave our own bubble, whether that is our bubble of privilege, of education, our political thinking, and mingle among others. And libraries offer us that chance to learn and grow, not just through the materials and resources on our shelves or on our websites, but by the people we get to share space with, which I think also aligns with this wonderful belief that you all hold of accepting one another. And acceptance can also be challenging. People, while wonderfully similar, can be incredibly different. Different backgrounds, upbringing, and values, and home cultures. And finding ways to accept folks as they are while offering them the opportunity to grow is a gift. Because when we accept others, we can receive acceptance, we can accept ourselves. So, and it's one of the things that I've really loved about librarianship in general, this ability to learn to accept. I was chatting with one of your members recently, and she said that sometimes it's nice to hear how people developed the passion for what they do. So I'll talk a little bit about why libraries for me. I myself had a somewhat hard childhood. I was a free lunch kid growing up, and we moved pretty much every year, at least once a year. And so I was always new in new communities, new schools, and I was also a constant caregiver of younger siblings. And it was libraries that welcomed me in those new communities. It didn't matter where we were. I could go to the public library, and I would feel a sense of safety and continuity and belonging from a really young age. Whenever we moved to a town, I knew the library was there for me, that their staff would be kind, that I would be welcomed and accepted as I was, that stories would be waiting for me on the shelves. And when I was a young adult, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, I walked into the local library and asked if I could volunteer. And by the end of that first volunteer shift, I knew that I had been reminded where I belonged, and it was in libraries. So in my 20 years of library service, I've been offered a lot of times, taught how to better accept others, how to build compassion, how to think about equity of service, and how to create places where others in my community can come inside and feel like they also belong. So that's why libraries for me. When I think about the value of justice, equity, and compassion in libraries, I think about librarians working to eliminate barriers, whether that's removing fines and fees whenever possible, or adding a social worker to their staff, or just having an in-house food pantry. Libraries everywhere are looking at what their neighbors need and trying to find ways to get that for them, and believing that connecting to services and resources is really no different than connecting people to information. We can do all of those things. Another area that these values apply is in our work to protect intellectual freedom and the freedom to read. Challenges to materials in libraries, possibly shockingly, maybe not, went up 65% between 2022 and 2023. In public libraries, the number jumped to 92%. Titles representing the voices and lived experiences of LGBTQ+ and BIPOC individuals are the majority of those targeted in censorship attempts. And it's libraries and librarians who are fighting against this, working to keep books on our shelves that reflect the lived experiences of our whole community, as well as those of people who don't live in our community. Because we know that stories offer us both mirrors and windows. We want to see ourselves reflected and also get an opportunity to glimpse a little bit of another life, lives that are different from our own. And we strive to continue offering programs and learning to benefit all of our patrons. Locally, it's been our programs that have driven most of our challenges here in La Crosse, whether it was offering a drag queen story time or offering Waking Up White as our regional read. It is sometimes those more visible optional events that cause concern. And while yes, we've had a couple of complaints about displays or materials on our shelves, we've been really fortunate to avoid significant challenges the way some of our neighbors have seen. You might be aware of the West Bend challenges in 2009. A couple originally wrote a letter protesting the list of LGBTQ titles for teens that were featured on that library's website, and later formally charged 37 books, most of them for teens. When asked about the specific titles that they had challenged, they made it clear that their belief was that libraries were there to protect young people, and so they disagreed with the general concept of homosexual books existing. It was West Bend librarians who fought that censorship and the demands for removal, including for a literal book burning. And when they had library board members removed for upholding their community's freedom to read, the next board also ultimately supported keeping those materials on the shelves. And some of the reasons that we do that is because we know that even if we're just pulling books off the shelves to review them following a challenge, we're keeping them out of the hands of the people who really need them in that moment of time. And for a lot of our young people, reading is more than just educational. It's a way for them to navigate their own identities and emotions at a really pivotal time in their lives, which is especially important for our teens. More than half of the high school students in Wisconsin are struggling with their mental health, according to the Department of Public Instruction right now. For young people, the library can be one of the only safe places for them. That's the only place where they can be safe to learn about their world or, again, find themselves reflected so they can better understand themselves. This is why libraries now focus on something we refer to as ethical selection rather than neutrality. Ethical selection is this idea that by virtue of our role in our community, we significantly influence or control the selection, organization, preservation, and dissemination of information. In a political system that values an informed citizenry, or should, we are members of a profession explicitly committed to intellectual freedom and the freedom to access information. We have a special obligation to ensure a free flow of information and ideas to both present and future generations. When we build our collections, we want to ensure that the information that folks are getting from them serves to make them more informed and educated. We have access to more stories from more people than ever now, and it's very clear that the experiences that some of us have are not the same as others. And so librarians' roles need to evolve so we can ensure that lived experiences of folks who have been traditionally marginalized politically, socially, economically, or by publishing can be heard and learned from by our communities. You can't have a free and responsible search for truth and meaning without the freedom to read. And as we face another divisive political year, which might be all of them these days, we know that information literacy is really important as well. Understanding where information is coming from, what the bias could be, whether it's actually factual or slanted, whether it's made up entirely or created by artificial intelligence, is getting trickier and trickier for folks, especially as both the technology and the groups using the technology become more and more sophisticated. So that's why you'll see many libraries now offering classes on media literacy, how to analyze data, technology classes, and more. We know that our responsibility is evolving in response to these things, and we know how vital it is for people who are bombarded by information overload to be able to navigate and evaluate the information they see. And while our commitment to inclusivity, free and accurate information access, and our ability to change with the times is wonderful, it can also be a slippery slope, trying to be all things to all people in our communities. Some of our staff in our library might do a story time in the morning and administer Narcan to an overdosing patron in the afternoon. Trying to find a thread, that through line of what our mission is in changing and challenging times, is a wonderful opportunity and sometimes overwhelmingly difficult, because libraries are the people who work in them. Our own library has been undergoing a lot of change these days. For those of you who visit us a lot, you know we've implemented a new catalog system, which manages every single resource we share, as well as our patron data. So our staff are in the midst of learning that new system right now. We just received a really exciting grant of $3 million to revamp our spaces so that we can have healthcare spaces, technology, access, educational spots, and meeting rooms, which is exciting, but again, another huge change coming. And we had multiple retirements recently of longtime employees, people whose institutional knowledge and workload was vast. So to deal with that, we're undergoing a structural reorganization of our staffing, shaking up everybody's teams and departments. I spent this past Friday talking one-on-one with staff members, one after the other, and the thing that stood out to me was that whether I was talking to librarians or assistants about where they see themselves in our new structure or how they're dealing with the change, how their skills and experiences will translate, what I heard over and over again was, it doesn't matter what department I'm in. I don't care about what my title is. I don't even care much about the money. Just let me keep doing the work that I love and serving this community and doing it well. So if you haven't visited your library lately, I really want to invite you and encourage you to do so. Come see us. We would love to have you. And thank you for listening today.